Hi, folks. Welcome back to another episode of Talking Conservation. If you listened to the last episode, you will have heard that we've got Steve Hogarth that's with us today in my home, and I collared him to actually jump on the podcast. And we did talk about all sorts of different masonry things up at the high levels of buildings that he works on. This episode is going to speak to him very specifically about his role that he does on conserving our old buildings at height. So not jumping off a scaffolding, I'm sure you use scaffolding as well, but actually using the rope access to go climbing up, steeplejacking up all these tall buildings, and how that differs from some of the work that other people do working on a roof. Hello and welcome to Talking Conservation,
the podcast all about conservation of old, traditional and historic buildings and sites.
With me, Rich Aylesbury.
And me, Stephen Boniface.
I've probably made a complete hash of that, Steve, but what I'd like you to know is, what is rope access and how is it used in building conservation, please?
So rope access, a lot of what we do is kind of analogous to traditional steeplejacking. Lots of what we do is working on church towers, cathedral spires, that kind of thing. And we're using a combination of ropes and ladders to access the high areas where scaffolding is just impractical or expensive, and to access those quickly and relatively cheaply and carry out the work that's needed up there, as well as surveys and inspections and whatever else is needed at height, essentially. But we also apply the same techniques and skills to other tall buildings. So as well as going up, we will go down things. So things like castles or other large buildings where there is roof access, but to access the vertical areas on the outside, we'll abseil down the outside and carry out the repairs that are necessary.
Makes complete sense. So I'm assuming with being rope access, you're that much more limited than if you've got a great big scaffold on the side of you. So how do you judge whether or not it's right for rope access versus for this job you're going to need a big scaffold?
Yeah,
that
so
must be tricky.
Generally, it comes down to a couple of things. The easy ones are where rope access is the only option. There are areas where a scaffold is essentially impossible, or would be just prohibitively expensive, where you've got castles that kind of overhang gullies and rivers, that kind of thing, where a scaffold is just not going to work, and so you need rope access. The other main application and kind of decision where you're going to use it is the setup costs and the time on site necessary for rope access are much smaller than scaffold. So to build a big scaffold on something like a church tower, if you're going to do a long job with a lot of work, really extensive schemes of work, then a scaffold makes sense because you can walk around, you can look at everything, you can spend as long as you like there. It's very easy. You can get lots of people up to do the work. Whereas if you want to do targeted areas of work or work that's not going to take very long, so small inspections, small repairs, those real kind of stitch in time situations, then rope access is really, really effective. We can be in and out if a job is only going to take a day, you don't want to spend a week putting up a scaffold and a week taking it down, where we could be in and out in a day, get the job done.
The thought of going up a steep or everything, just, I shudder at the thought of it. How did you even start in this? Were you one of those kids that loved jumping down buildings on ropes and things? And how is it you chose to do this particular job?
As a child, I was absolutely terrified of heights. I have a very strong memory of being on a scout camp and refusing to do the abseil and being horribly embarrassed about it. But since then, fortunately, I've been a rock climber for most of my life. Before I was working in rope access conservation, I was working as a joiner and various other similar things, as well as being a climber. And some friends that I'd had for a long time were working with an old steeplejack, was doing really good conservation work and had a lot of those traditional skills, but he was also a climber and kind of was using lots of the applicable skills from climbing. We all ended up working with him for a while, kind of did sort of an informal apprenticeship with him. Around the time that he was looking to retire, the guys I was working with, set up Highlife Rope Access, and I've been with them since.
You said climbing was always a hobby. but the conservation side was part of your working life first, and then the rope access. You've almost merged your hobby with your work. Is that
Oh, absolutely.
a
Yeah.
fair summary? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've mentioned churches and towers and things. What are some of the more memorable buildings that you've actually worked on, and what are some of the interesting things you found that us normal mortals wouldn't have seen or heard of, perhaps?
Yeah, so one of the really wonderful things about rope access conservation is that you're always working on old buildings because it's conservation, and they're going to be tall, so they're going to be the big exciting ones. The majority of our work is churches, castles, and cathedrals, but also some other really interesting large historic buildings. So we've worked on the Liver building in Liverpool, the Port of Liverpool building. Again, very tall historic structures which need the touch of a proper conservator. Some of the kinds of interesting jobs we've done and things we've found. We've done a few phases of work at Chepstow Castle, which is obviously just an incredible building, an incredible location. One of the sides of the castle has this cliff going down to the river. The castle's right on the edge of the cliff, the river below, and we've done some work on the riverside walls. So you're kind of hanging on the side of the castle with the river and the cliffs below you. Really incredible locations. Also at Chepstow Castle, we've done some work in the Great Hall. So the Great Hall, it's ruinous now. So it previously had floors all the way up. So it's a very tall, it must be kind of 15 or 16 meters high, and previously had multiple floors up it. So you can be in those areas where there used to be floors that no one can get to anymore. So you can be stood at the historic floor level, looking at the historic features that are at floor level, but there's no floor beneath you.
So you do internal work as well?
So occasionally internal work, yeah. So Chepstow Castle, those internal areas are now external because it's ruinous. But we have done things like surveys of roof structures in churches with exposed timbers, because we can relatively easily move around those high level timbers and survey the structure.
Posh way of saying swing like a monkey from rafter to rafter.
In a very careful and controlled way.
That sounds like a lot of fun to me. It just sounds like a giant sort of like ninja warrior course, isn't it?
Just like that.
We've spoken about using rope access and some of its advantages. What sort of things have you discovered that, if it hadn't have been for the rope access, might not have been discovered or found through inspection that have really made a difference to some of these buildings?
I mean, it's less exciting, but the things that make the biggest difference every time, that we find all the time, is just block gutters. Yeah. Just straightforward, we'll go to a building, they'll have a horrific damp problem, they'll think there's something wrong with their roof, something wrong with their detailing. You get up there and there's,
a football.
There's a football, a tennis ball in the gutter, and you take it out and say, well, there you go, look, this is tens of thousands of pounds worth of work saved, the trouble of erecting a scaffold saved. I would say that 90% of the good we do for buildings is just unblocking the gutters. It's really straightforward things that always make the most difference. But we do also find lots of things that you would only find through a tactile survey with an experienced rope access conservator. So things like incorrect lead detailing, which you can only really understand when you get up there and start to peel back and look underneath and see what's going on. Things like that. We see lots of drone surveys being used to inspect buildings now. You just wouldn't be able to see with binoculars or from the ground or with a drone survey, and being able to get hands-on makes a big difference. Equally, lots of fairly straightforward things like open coping stone joints, that kind of thing, are really, really easy for us to find and correct. But with other survey methods, you just wouldn't necessarily see that detail.
For homeowners, I mean, obviously, some of our listeners will be dealing with, or indeed may own, a very large, massive building. And, obviously your services would come in extremely useful. But for most homeowners, smaller buildings, their access is going to be limited. Thinking about drones, pole cameras and things like that, you've mentioned some of the disadvantages, but do they have some advantage in at least providing an early warning of, you've mentioned block cutters being the one thing you often find. Is that the case that for the ordinary homeowner, a drone survey might reveal some of those issues and be helpful anyway?
Yeah, so they absolutely have a place. And yeah, lots of straightforward issues will be revealed. With buildings like most normal, reasonably sized homes, you're often not going to get the kind of complexity of problems that you will with something like a cathedral or a ruinous castle. But really, any opportunity you can to get hands-on and look as close up as you can and really look at all of the angles and look at what's going on is going to give you a big advantage. What drones are really good for is identifying potential issues. And the same with pole cameras or binoculars, looking at things and thinking, is this thing right? Does that look wrong? Is there something I need to explore further here? And then if you do need to explore further, then you can, worry about accessing that however you need to. Having said that, we have worked on quite a few domestic buildings, either, like you say, larger buildings where erecting a scaffold would be expensive, but also inaccessible buildings. There's a lot of, almost all scaffolders need to get a 7.5 ton truck up to the building. We've worked on small remote cottages where a truck full of scaffold won't get up the lane, but us in a small van will get up there.
I suppose there's one thing that a drone and a camera pole can't do, and that's fix anything. I mean, ultimately, if you were up on a rope ladder and doing an inspection, if it's just as quick for you to go, do you know what? While I'm up here, can't do that with a drone.
Yeah. So one of the biggest applications of rope access is always small focused repairs, patching leadwork, so welding patches in leadwork, small indent repairs to stone, scattered roofing repairs, small areas of repointing or areas of repointing that would be inaccessible. It's those kind of stitch in time small fixes and small bits of maintenance that are really ideal for rope access.
Because it's affordable, it's quite quick, and actually, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Saving a big bill later on, makes a lot of sense. What were your considerations when you're assessing a building to do rope access, whether it's a survey or maintenance on? Because I'm assuming you have to consider the weather, and that's a big factor, and certainly the wind shear. What are the other things? I mean, we were having a brew earlier on in terms of what happens when you find, I don't know, some livestock up there. Not livestock, but what's the word? Well, birds. Wildlife, not livestock. I mean, if you find livestock on a building, you've got a big problem up on the roof. But
so just like any other hands-on survey, you've always got to be conscious of your legal responsibilities in terms of wildlife. So particularly on things like ruined castles and churches, small crevices, there's potential for bats. All high buildings, anywhere that you can't see areas, there's potential for nesting birds, things like that. So you're always going to consider those factors in terms of where you go and when and how your schedule works. But also there's a lot of consideration of just how you're going to get to all of these places. Every building is a different puzzle. So some buildings are very easy. You take a lift up to the top, and then they've had professional anchors installed that you can abseil off. But lots of country medieval churches don't necessarily have those facilities, and often it's a real problem-solving exercise to how you're going to get to certain locations and how you're going to do the work you need to do. So we've got a lot of tools up the tool belt, a great variety of ladders and devices and techniques to access the different areas of the building without harming the fabric.
Well, knowing what to secure onto, I guess, as well with the ropes, because
absolutely,
stick a lasso around that and actually you don't want to start pulling that over.
Yeah.
So in terms of the process, you arrive at a site and you're going to go up this building, bearing in mind that you don't want to be having to keep going backwards and forwards time and time again. The client probably, if you find something, they want it fixed. So I'm assuming that when you go to a site, you already know that you're probably going to have some mortar, some lead work, some material, some equipment, so that when you go up there, you say, block gutter, fine, we deal with that. Oh, there's some, loose masonry, some open jointed pointing, etc., etc. Do you then go back down, mix up your stuff, go back up and deal with it? Is it as simple and quick as that? Or is it am I oversimplifying it really?
It is often as quick and simple as that. Yeah. So we have a very multi-skilled team who can deal with a variety of materials and issues. And we have well-stocked vans of tools and equipment and materials to kind of deal with most of the common issues. But generally, we'll be either addressing a specific concern that an architect or surveyor has noted and wants us to go and address, or often we will carry out an inspection and also carry out repairs. So we'll carry out the inspection or the survey, identify the specific issues, present a report with those issues, and then come back and fix them.
And presumably, if you see something that might need a greater repair than you're capable of doing there and then, if it's causing a problem, do you provide a temporary cover or fix or something like that, so that at least the building's protected in the meantime until they can get someone to do the more permanent repair?
Yeah, often. So it's very regular that if there's something which we aren't able to deal with there and then, we'll find a way to provide the cover necessary or the support necessary, and then come back and carry out the proper repair. Lots of the buildings we work with are listed or are scheduled monuments, so we'll carry out an inspection, provide, if there's an immediate issue, provide some kind of temporary cover, some kind of temporary holding or support, and then kind of initiate with the client the process of getting the necessary consents to carry out the proper repair. So rope access is also useful as part of wider schemes of work. If you have a large building with potentially multiple issues, rope access can be really great for surveying. So we can access all of the areas of the building, particularly all of the high areas, then provide, a detailed schedule of works, all of the issues, so that when you then get to the part where you're putting the scaffold up, you know exactly what you're going to do. What you don't want to have to do is put up a scaffold, survey it, find all of the issues, and then leave that scaffold there for months and months and months while you arrange the work.
So in many ways, it's much more surgical. It's going in and finding out what you really need to do. And going back to the point you just raised, I mean, if someone's going to have to put up scaffolding to do work, if you don't know what that work is, presumably that scaffolding, you're going to have to agree a contract for goodness knows how many weeks, because you don't know what you're going to be facing. Whereas if you know that it's a certain amount of work, you can agree perhaps a shorter period for that scaffolding, so you can actually bring your overall costs down. Is that a fair summary of how it could work?
Yeah, it's really great for bringing certainty to projects, finding out exactly what the issues are. I mean, often with big projects, you might not know how comprehensive a series of repairs you'll be able to afford. And so doing something quicker and cheaper to identify all of the issues and know what your budget is going to be. What you don't want to do is put up a scaffold, find out, oh, actually, we can't afford any of this. and the entire scaffold was wasted. The whole, you can get in early, make decisions that are going to give you certainty.
And also the consent process as well. If you're going to do anything, it's going to be, going beyond a like-for-like repair or something, you get a listed consent, then that can take several weeks, can't it?
Really, what we're talking about here is rope access and the sort of work you're doing. Certainly for larger buildings, more complex buildings, tall buildings, it should, by the sounds of it, really be part of the routine maintenance schedule for that building. Maybe once a year having someone like you go, clamber all over it to have a quick look. Because you're not going to put scaffolding up once a year, but you might be able to afford to get you to go round it once a year. We could actually see a much improved maintenance regime for some of these buildings if only we were to use rope access in that wiser way, perhaps.
Absolutely, yeah. And even more complicated maintenance. So things like back to the lime-washed church towers, if you have a church tower which is going to need lime washing every 5 years, you don't necessarily need to scaffold it. We can carry that out by rope access. If you have a plan to gradually repoint a church tower, for example, lots of churches don't have the budget to scaffold the whole church tower, repoint the whole thing. We could come every couple of years, repoint a face each time without all of the cost associated with scaffolding the whole thing. All of these things, again, this comes back to the fact that everything you do on a building is impermanent. Everything is going to need maintenance. Everything is going to need someone to come back to with some level of regularity.
It's interesting you say that. One of the things I often say to clients, or have said in the past, and certainly say to surveyors, is that we cannot and never will be able to stop these buildings deteriorating, because that's just a part and parcel of life. They will deteriorate as they get old, as they get weathered, and so on and so forth. However, what we do to that building affects the rate of deterioration. And the more frequently we inspect for maintenance and look after that building, the greater the length of life we're giving that building. Is that a fair summary of how you would also see it?
Absolutely. Small, regular maintenance is the thing that keeps buildings going. There's no point waiting for things to get bad enough to put a scaffold up, because you've let them get bad at that point. You need to keep on top of all buildings to keep them in good order. And that's how you prevent those small things that cause lots of damage.
Can I just ask you another question? And that is recording what you're doing. Rich and I have in the past talked about keeping a logbook for houses, for example, keeping a record of the works that are being done to a building for future owners and for your own sake sometimes. Now, with what you're doing, obviously you're up dangling on the end of a rope. You're not going to start making notes necessarily. But do you keep a record of what you've been doing? Do you video record what you're doing as you're up there? And what sort of record would there be for the present owner, for their benefit moving forward, and or a future owner moving forward?
I'm just saying, this is other than the Instagram selfies I see him doing on the steeple of some massive church.
So we absolutely do take notes while we're up there. We'll go up, we'll have a little bag with us. So I would imagine it's the process that we undertake as we're surveying is probably very similar to the process that you undertake when you're surveying. So we go up, we have a notebook, a pen, we have a camera, and we have survey cards. So we're able to take labeled pictures of the things we're looking at and the issues we're identifying. And there's there's various levels of survey and recording that we'll carry out. So every simple repair job will receive a kind of basic post-work report. So we'll provide notes and photos of before and notes and photos after, and the client will get that as a document at the end of the job. But we also carry out full surveys to a high standard. So we have surveyors that work for us. We'll take them up on the ropes. And then along with kind of our experienced conservators and tradespeople, we'll carry out full detailed surveys, making notes of everything. We can carry out stone by stone surveys. We'll take an elevation up with us and mark exactly what's going on. Yeah, it can be as detailed as you're willing to pay for, essentially.
Okay, Steve, I've got some quick fire questions here as we're coming towards the end of our little bit of a session with you. So focusing now on the buildings that you work on, let's get your top 3 details that everyone should check on their building.
Rainwater goods, absolutely every time. Really, as regularly as possible, check and clear your rainwater goods. Obvious weak points for water ingress. Anywhere that any junction of different materials. So where your chimney meets the lead, where you have different roofs interacting with each other, the areas around your windows, all of those areas are really vulnerable. And your roof, have a good look at your roof, get an idea of the pattern, where things should be, look for things that are out of place.
Awesome. On the previous episode, we covered a lot on mortars, but just for wrapping it up here, just very quickly, mortars, do's and don'ts when it comes to the high exposed areas that you deal with mostly.
do understand the entire picture of the way that area is working and what you're asking the mortar to do, and do explore all of the options and speak to someone who really understands the kind of variety of mortars and the way they can solve the problems that you're trying to solve.
Which leads me nicely on to then, if you are unsure in terms of what to do, where can you go for some consultations, or where can you go for advice?
So obviously, if you can get hold of a good conservation professional, a surveyor or a good conservation tradesperson to ask about a specific detail, that's really worthwhile. The SPAB have a free helpline which you can call, and there's lots of advice on the SPAB's website as well. Lots of advice there on the Historic England website that's really worth looking at if you're trying to understand the way your building works.
But if you want specific advice on your particular issue, how can they get in touch with you? Or is that something you can do, or is that something Highlife do?
No, that's something that we do. Okay. So if you have a look at our website, which is highliferopeaccess.com, you can also have a look at us on social media at Highlife Rope Access. And I am at Steve Hogarth. Okay. Hopefully you can link those in the
show notes.
Then you can get in touch with us there.
Awesome.
Can I just ask? I mean, you're based in Wales. Do you cover the whole country? Are there other other companies like you doing things elsewhere in the country, or are you totally unique?
So there are a few. There's a small number of specialist conservation rope access companies. There's a few really good ones. Highlife. So the company is based in North Wales. I'm actually based in West Yorkshire, but we cover the whole country. So I've just been working yesterday on a church tower in North Wales. Tomorrow I'm working on a town building in Bath. And next week I'm working in Durham. So we get about a bit. Yeah, we cover the whole country.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. So, thank you, Steve, for all that. It's been absolutely fascinating. It's an area of work I have known nothing about, simply because I can't stand heights anyway. That's why I've tended to deal with small domestic buildings the whole of my professional life, because I don't want to get up high. But anyway, it's been fascinating to hear about that. The detailing is clearly an issue for these buildings, and that's one of the key takeaways is looking at detailing, looking at how water is falling onto the building and around the building, and then getting the right lime to use. And it's not everything works with every single building. We've got to look at the individual situation for that building to understand what lime to use, how to use it, even the aggregate. I mean, what you said about aggregates I thought was fascinating, because that's actually a future episode that we've been talking about, is actually looking at aggregates. So that's a good link for us to think about future episodes. Talking about future episodes, we've got lined up an interview. We're going from one extreme, i.e. the top and high level areas, the more exposed bits, to the interiors and the fine plasterwork. So we've got lined up as an interview with Sean Wheatley, who is a plasterer who deals with very fine plasterwork. So look out for that. Thank you for watching or listening, wherever you watch or view or listen to this episode. Look out for future episodes. Please like and subscribe so that you get notification of future episodes. And we look forward to seeing you again on the next one. Thank you very much, and goodbye. You've been listening to Talking Conservation,
the podcast all about conservation of old, traditional and historic buildings and sites.
With me, Stephen Boniface.
And me, Rich Aylesbury.